My name is Claire Miller. I am a member of GreenGrace. I'm also the communications director for the Maryland Campaign for the Environment. We're very excited to have you with us tonight. And I am at this point, I am going to turn it over to Bernadette Roche. So Bernadette.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm delighted tonight to be having the conversation about faith in the environment with the Reverend Canon Sally Bingham. I'm a professor in the biology department at Loyola University, Maryland in Baltimore, where I also serve as the director of the environmental studies minor. I'm also a person of faith, and I work with a wonderful group of earth stewards in an organization called GreenGrace. It's the Episcopal ministry, the environmental ministry of the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland. We have recently answered a call to be more deeply engaged with the environmental justice issues around us. And so we've been working very closely hand in hand with the Maryland Environmental Human Rights Amendment Campaign. This is led by Claire Miller, our host tonight, and Rabbi Nina Beth Carden. We invited Reverend Canon Bingham, Sally, to share with us tonight some of her insights and lessons that she's learned from 35 years of faith-driven environmental activism. Sally's a priest and canon for the environment in the Episcopal Diocese of California. She's founder and president emeritus of the Regeneration Project and its Interfaith Power Light, or IPL as we know it fondly, campaign. It's a religious response to climate change. The IPL campaign includes a national network of over I was so thrilled to learn this, 20,000 congregations with affiliated programs in 40 states. And our local IPL is a fantastic partner to GreenGrace. And I say 20,000 congregations, I think it's actually 20,000 organizations. Is that may be more appropriate? Sally's had national recognition and influence, serving on the national advisory boards of Environmental Defense Fund, Pacific Forest Trust, the Union of Concerned Scientists, and Climate One. She's received numerous awards as well, including the 2007 U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Climate Protection Award, the Purpose Prize, the Energy Globe Award, and recognition as a sacred gift to the planet by the World Wildlife Fund. We're so honored and excited to have Sally with us here tonight for an hour. Thank you, Sally. Sally, it seems to me that the Regeneration Project started locally, but has exploded into a strong national movement. And I was wondering, what lessons can you share about how this movement gained traction and what made it so transferable as a national model?
Well, thank you, Bernadette, and thanks for having me on tonight. And thank you, Claire, for setting us up with the internet. I'm really delighted that there are actually other people who want to hear about this too. And I love talking about the Interfaith Power and Light program and how it got started. You are correct. It did start locally in San Francisco. And as much as I would love to take credit and give you some big, important hint on how you take a small movement and go national, this was something where the timing is what made it so important and national. Nobody that I knew in the religious community in California ever spoke, and I'm just not talking about Episcopalians, because I have Jewish friends and Catholic friends and Muslim friends and Mormon friends. Nobody had ever heard a clergy person talk about protecting creation from the pulpit. And when I sort of badgered our minister at Little St. James out on California Street, he said, well, why don't you go to seminary and find out what the disconnect is between what we say we believe in and how we behave. I mean, he would rather that I go to seminary and spend 10 years getting ordained than him get into the pulpit and say, maybe we should be protecting the water and the air. But it enticed me into doing it. And I went to my bishop and I talked to him about going to seminary when he pointed out that until I had gone to college, I couldn't go to seminary, that you don't go out and get a master's degree until you have an undergrad degree. And I had never gone to college. I was 45 years old, and I went to the University of San Francisco, which is a Jesuit school, and decided I would, be the undergrad there. So I spent 4 years studying religion, essentially, and psychology. I took psychology because what at 45 years old I was doing in college. But what happened is that after I finished college, I went to seminary, and I met another Episcopalian who felt like that I did too, that everybody that says they love God should be loving creation and loving what God loves. And so we founded the Regeneration Project, but we had no money, and we made it a sort of a side project of the Tides Foundation, which is a big fiscal agency for a lot of nonprofits. But we couldn't raise money because we didn't have measurable differences that foundations wanted to support. We had to be able to say, well, so many people are now environmentalists, and there were only 10 there before, and now they're 300, or we have a certain number of congregations. We had to have some metrics. And renewable energy at that time, green energy, was being sold in California. And we decided we'd try to get the Episcopal congregations in California to buy renewable energy. It costs more, but we said, look, you're saving creation. You're saving money because you had to, before you ever bought green energy, you would cut down on the amount of energy that you use. And somebody at the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation discovered that what we were doing in California, and put an article in the Wall Street Journal of all places saying, look what the Episcopal Diocese of California is doing with renewable energy. And their big subject was renewable energy, trying to get folks off of fossil fuel. Now, jump ahead, we're 30 years later now, and most everyone who cares about air and pollution and health knows that fossil fuels are bad for us. But it was that kind of serendipitous good fortune that got us going, because once we started getting known as Episcopal Power and Light in California, other denominations would call and say, is this just for the Episcopal Church, or can we do this too? So organically, it became an interfaith program. And then we were going great guns with California Interfaith Power and Light when I got a call from an Episcopal priest in Georgia who said, I want to do this down here. Will you come down and help us? Those were the days when you got on an airplane and you flew down there, and they had a 3-day conference, and we talked about how to make Georgia Interfaith Power and Light happen. And so it went around the country, and I wasn't on the radio saying, join our program or anything like that. People wanted to really get involved in environmental work and saving creation. They just were kind of looking for the venue to make that happen in their diocese and in their congregations. And in almost every congregation, there are 22,000 of them, by the way, Bernadette, right now, 22,000 congregations of all different denominations. And invariably, there's someone in every church, synagogue, mosque, temple that cares about the environment. And then it's just a matter of how do you stir up the interest in the rest of the congregation? And I know we're going to get into that later on, but I don't have any magical way of spreading a movement. I think it was the timing. And you know what else? I also think we did it. I mean, all over the country, people care about saving creation today in all different religions. But 30 years ago, nobody thought about it. I mean, I talked about God put Adam in the garden to till it and to keep it. And people would say to me, gee, I never thought about it that way before. It was just a matter of raising consciousness. And then it just took off on its own.
Right. Well, that's fabulous. And you spoke about this a little bit in your answer there, but you think there's anything particularly powerful about interfaith dialogue in addressing these kind of issues?
I definitely do. It's an extraordinary experience, because we all know that historically religions don't get along with each other. And to be, I think the largest diversity of religions was when I was in Utah, in Salt Lake City, and it was the Episcopal Diocese there. They called together a group of people, and we had Jews, Muslims, Christians, Baha'is, Mormons. The whole room was full of all these different denominations coming together and caring about the same thing. And that has been an extraordinary experience, but I think it's very powerful for religions to come together on something like that. And there was some disagreement between some of the Catholics or the evangelicals at times were saying, we have to have this come from our own. It can't come from the Episcopal Church. It's got to come from our own religious leaders. But they've all gotten over that, at least as far as I can tell. I mean, the Evangelical Environmental Network is powerful. And I did have someone say that, who was an evangelical, and he said, if we work interfaith, the other evangelicals won't follow us. And then, but that's 10 years ago. Today, they work with everybody. But it's a powerful thing when you can bring all these different religions together.
That's great. Thanks. Well, in 2010, another of GreenGrace's wonderful partners, Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake, with Rabbi Nina Beth Carden as chair of the board of trustees, and 9 regional faith leaders, including our own Bishop Eugene Sutton, came together to sign a document that's called Covenanting for Creation. And let me just read a quote from this document. We are at a crossroad. God's word of covenant with land and with each other calls us to turn from our path of unrestrained consumption and careless disregard of the integrity of creation, and guides us to the straight path where the good way lies. Religious communities must lead the way. We must remember how to be full without excess, how to be satisfied with enough. We must delight in ways of living that confer well-being to all people and all creation. Today, in the presence of God and one another, we commit ourselves to walking the path of covenant by sharing God's blessing with justice and compassion so that all creation and all people may live together. And I recently discovered that the National Episcopal Church has developed a covenant to care for creation, which leads off with, in Jesus, God loved the whole world. We follow Jesus, so we love the world God loves. Concerned about the global climate emergency, drawing from a range of approaches for a diverse context, we commit to form and restore loving, liberating, life-giving relationships with all creation. So my question for you is this: do you think people in modern day society have a sense of the depth of the term covenant? And what is it about covenant that ties people from multiple faith traditions together?
To the first part, does modern society understand the depth of the word covenant? In a word, I would say no. I would say that most people probably have never heard the word covenant. I think it is a religious term, and I think it's a very strong term for Christians, particularly because of Noah's Ark and the rainbow in the sky, and God made a covenant with us and earth, and that for, I think, Christians is a powerful understanding of a partnership. You do your share and I'll do mine, and if we take good care of the earth will take good care of us. Does it connect to interfaith dialogue, did you ask me, or interfaith relations?
Yeah, so what is it about covenant that ties people from multiple faith traditions together? You answered part of it by saying it's primarily understood by Christians, but I wonder if given that this event occurred where all these people from multi-faiths were covenanting for creation, I just wondered if it's something that is a tool that could be used, in a modern society.
Well, what we discovered over 20 years of working interfaith, every single religion has a mandate to take care of creation. They haven't all necessarily put it right out on the platform up front with a neon sign, but beginning to more and more. The Muslims say that God created the earth in balance and that it's up to humans to keep that balance. And the Buddhists, of course, believe that absolutely everything is interconnected. So what I'm getting at is, I think each of these religions maybe have their own covenant. They're not necessarily in covenant with each other, except that with at least the Jews, Muslims, and Christians, we all have one belief in, we all have belief in one God. So that brings us together. But in terms of covenant between the religions, I would struggle with that a little bit.
Okay, well, that's fair. Thanks. So one of my friends in the diaconate is deeply involved in the environmental ministry, and she calls herself a doomsday prophet. Do you think of yourself in this way too? And if so, what is it like to be a doomsday prophet?
Well, I'm not a doomsday prophet, and I'm sorry that she thinks of herself that way. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind and in the mind of a lot of the climate scientists that this is a matter of life and death. And we absolutely have to do something about it, or, the earth may become inhabitable. But I don't walk around saying that. Nobody wants me to come into their congregation and give a sermon on, you all are such terrible people, you're driving big truck. Believe me, I did this in the beginning before I knew that message is not accepted. People will accept it, but then they kind of, turn their back and say, well, that's just that doomsday person. We have to have hope, and we have to know that as humans, we created this problem. And as humans, we can fix it if everybody wants to. And you may remember, Bernadette, you're a scholar, somebody years ago, and I'm not going to come up with the right person, but somebody said, hope is work with your sleeves rolled up. In other words, if you are working towards something, whatever you're working towards is giving you hope. And I have worked so hard on climate education, and my neighbors who have solar on their roofs and are driving electric cars, that gives me tremendous hope. And the children around the world who are getting involved in this climate issue, that gives me hope. And therefore, I just can't take on that doomsday attitude, because I think that is stifling. And if people think there's absolutely nothing we can do, we're all just going to die of bad air and pollution, they're not going to do anything. They're going to say, what's the point?
Right.
So I think hope is where we have to hang our hat.
Well, thank you. And I guess as a follow-up question to that, why should ministers, rabbis, priests, vestries, church councils, organizations within the church, why should they be talking about? Why should we be talking about this in our faith communities?
Well, as I mentioned, it's a matter of life and death. It's just the question is, how bad will it be, and how soon? And as religious people who say they love God, we have to be supporting what God loves, which is the creation, all of it. And it's interesting that we're talking to each other tonight. I preached yesterday on St. Francis and his life and what he believed. And Francis was not necessarily an environmentalist, even though he gets called that. He wanted to live his life in the image of Christ and love everything that was created, whether it was a tree or a rock or a snail or a squirrel or a wolf or people. Every single thing that God created is sacred. And his belief was, you support and love all of that. They're not certain segments that take, I think somebody said to me once, God doesn't prefer humans over a squirrel just because we can drive cars or something. Even though the squirrel can't drive a car, God still loves that squirrel. Right. And I'm going to go slightly off track. Take me back to the origin.
That's okay. And actually, it wasn't a coincidence that we did this on the Feast of St. Francis.
Oh, right.
Way back in the summer when we talked, we both decided that that would be a great date. So
That's right.
so, yeah.
And
So,
what else is fascinating, I think, and interesting about St. Francis is that he came from a wealthy family, and he stripped himself of all his fancy clothes and his shoes, and he walked around the streets of Assisi naked. And somebody threw a brown blanket out of a window at him and said, "Put this on." And of course, that brown blanket is what the followers of St. Francis now wear, that brown robe. And he said in his writings that when people had a lot of possessions or money or were rich, they were dismissive of people who were poor, and they didn't develop their own spiritual enlightenment. They didn't develop spiritually, which was what we are called to do. So he was freeing himself of his possessions. And I think some of us could do that too. We all have too much stuff. And if you have a lot of stuff, you have a lot of money, and then you kind of have to have the responsibility of taking care of all that. I'm looking at my own background at all those books, and I thought, what am I going to do with all those books? I probably have read them. I'm probably not going to read them again. And maybe someone else could enjoy them. I mean, I'm starting to have this new Francis look now, or outlook. But I do think we get sort of wrapped up in our material possessions versus our spiritual development and our love of creatures and creation and everything that was created.
thank you. So tonight, one of the things we wanted to do was we were looking for some practical advice on how to go about being part of this movement, this environmental movement. So how can we be persuasive when taking the moral stand that we are bound, we are called to do this work, that we are called to care for creation. So how do you do that also when you're not perfect at home, you're not doing everything perfectly, you're not the perfect model. So then how do you make this moral stand?
Well, I think that we just have to help people do what they can. I mean, people ask me when I finish a talk, they'll say, "Well, what are you doing in your life?" Well, I drive an electric car. I have a compost in the backyard, but I do not have solar on my roof. I tried, and I have an old Victorian house, and the roof is, like this, and they can't do it, or they've said they can't. And if they do it, it's a huge expense, and it will only cut my energy bill by a few dollars a month. So I don't have solar on my roof. I'm not perfect. I can't do everything, but I can do what I can do.
Right.
And I have spoken to people who say, "I don't know what to do. I'm recycling." And I say, well, if recycling is all you can get at, then just keep recycling and feel good about yourself because you're recycling. If you can't afford an electric car, or you like the gas guzzler that you've got, keep it. But if you get another car, get an electric one.
Right.
And I just think we have to encourage people to do whatever they can. And it's fun. You can start adding up things. If you find that you have the time and you can walk to the grocery store, you can walk to church, you can walk to the pharmacy, and you start doing more of that, not only is it good for you, but you're saving creation at the same time, because you're not in a car putting fossil fuels into the atmosphere. And I do something that, I don't know, I just hope I don't get knifed one day, but when I see people sitting in their car with the engine running and they're on their phone, pressing buttons and the engine's going, I'd tap on the window and say, why is your engine running? And they might say, well, what does it matter? And I'll say, there are 3 reasons. You're wasting gas, you're polluting the air, and it's my air. I have to breathe this air that you're polluting. And you're causing the climate to change. And they kind of look at you like, I don't know, but I feel good after I've done it. I think, okay, I survived that encounter, and I just showed one person not to sit in their car with the engine running for no real reason.
Right. And I think sometimes people do things out of habit. I mean, I've had this conversation with my students where we talk about how, when people brush their teeth, a lot of times they turn the water on, they start brushing their teeth, and the water's running the whole time, which serves absolutely no purpose whatsoever. But somehow it's just a habit. And unless you think about it, you don't have a lot of students will nod their heads like, I do that too. I don't know why I do that. So just bringing someone's attention to it sometimes. I did notice in the chat, somebody said progress, not perfection. And I think that's, I think that's important as well. You do what you can do. So
you've reminded me of something that I have to tell you, because it's such a cute story. Jane Goodall used to come to Grace Cathedral because she was friends with our Dean, Alan Jones. And Jane was up in the pulpit once making that, and she'd go like this and make a noise like a chimp. And she's a wonderful person. And she said to the congregation, it may not feel like you're doing much when you turn the water off when you're brushing your teeth, but what if everybody did it? We could save a river. And I've never forgotten that. And I do think what you just said, Bernadette, if we could raise consciousness about it, people will think about it. I guarantee you the people that are listening to us tonight are going to go to bed, but before they go to bed, they're going to brush their teeth and they're going to turn the water off while they're doing this.
Yeah, let's
At least one or two of them will, right?
I think you're right. I think you're right. That's right. Or they'll maybe say something to somebody else when they see it too, and say maybe that would help. And yeah, you don't want to be a nag, but sometimes it's nice to point these things out. In the book you edited, Love God, Heal Earth, there's a quote that reads, perhaps the most enduring concept within these pages is that the environment is an issue of compassion and not politics. Can you illustrate this quote with some examples from your own experience?
Well, I should think a little bit about that, but what's been kind of sad in this whole ministry is that everybody wants clean air. Everyone wants to be able to go outside and breathe and not worry about an asthma attack, we all want the climate to be stable, because if it's stable, we just are more stable ourselves. And I just feel that politics is causing people to not really think it through, that they're not understanding that we're all after the same thing. And I don't know why it became so political. I suspect it may have had something to do with Al Gore, in that he's been the big climate champion. And I say that because I was in New Mexico once visiting a friend, and she handed me this magazine that was Scientific America, and it was questioning climate change. It was written by one of the climate deniers. And I said, but Bobby, you can't, the fact is the earth is warming. We're seeing it on the temperature gauges. The scientists are showing it and telling us. And she said, well, I don't believe it and I don't like Al Gore. So I thought, okay, there's some, and then, and it's so sad for me. It's almost like this COVID vaccinations, if you're Republican, maybe you don't want to get a vaccination. Well, why does politics enter into something that is a scientific dispute? It's not even a dispute in terms of climate change, but these are scientific facts. These are not just something we made up or believe. Oh, and that's the other thing, that cute Catherine Hayhoe, Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, she lives in Texas, and she's
weirding.
What?
She talks about global weirding.
Yeah, that's right, she does. But she also said, she's said a number of things that have made a lot of sense to me, but I've just lost what it was. I remember the global weirding, but well, let's keep going. And when I think of that, I'll let you know.
Catherine Hayhoe, she's one of my heroes. So
yeah.
Yes, let's see, where was I? I do want to add my own thoughts on that, the politics and everything. And I study evolutionary biology, and one of the things that's really interesting and fascinating to me is group selection and just the idea of sort of the psychology of groups. And I think a lot of it is, I learned something the other day by listening to Hidden Brain, that group membership can actually change how your brain works in terms of viewing the world. and the chemicals and the, it can actually change even how you smell something. So this idea of group identity, I think, is a very strong thing in human society. We're tribal type, people. And I think, sometimes we have to go for the individual discernment, just see what's really there, and try to find the truth, rather than trying to kind of seeing it through the lens of the group. And I think everybody, I'm not saying any one political party or group of people has to do that. I think we all have to be careful about our own implicit biases and our own lens shifting through membership. But anyway, so let's see. I was looking at the quote, and oh yes, here's my follow-up question. It seems that some people of faith feel that politics should not be mixed with religion. And so I wonder, does framing the responses to the environmental issues in terms of compassion allow for richer dialogue within a religious context? And if so, how?
Well, I think that's true. I think that it's very important that we as religious people leave the politics out of our sermons and discussion groups. Sometimes it's hard to, Jesus was a political activist.
Right.
And almost everything we do is somehow political one way or another. But things like COVID, climate change are not political views or just some party's opinion. They are scientific facts. And I think that's where the dialogue has to change. There's just no, that's what Catherine Hale said. Climate change is a scientific fact. It's not a belief. We believe in the Virgin Mary, and we say all these religious things that probably have no scientific value, but they are what we believe. That's different from a fact that something like climate change is not a belief. And she said, so many people are going around saying, well, do you believe in climate change? And she says that we have to say, it's not something you believe in, it's a scientific fact.
Right.
Yeah, and if we could separate scientific facts from politics, we would be a long way down the road. And you can certainly talk about climate change from the pulpit without talking about politics or who voted for what.
Right. So at GreenGrace, we're partnering with the Maryland Environmental Human Rights Campaign to promote advocacy on passing a constitutional amendment in the state of Maryland that would recognize that a healthful environment is a basic human right for all. We had hoped that by speaking with you tonight, we could accrue some invitations to churches in the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland to speak with them about this important issue and share with them how they can enhance their green team. Can you share any advice about how to approach these encounters?
Well, I mentioned earlier, and I really believe this, that nearly every congregation has some people in it who care about clean air, clean water, and creation. And if you can bring what we did to get green teams started in different congregations was to try to identify those one or two people. And you need to have the rector get on board. You don't want to be trying to the clergy don't usually want to be told what to do, but they're happy to help you. If you want to do it, they'll support you. And I think it's important to find and put a kind of a group, no matter, it could be 2 or 3 people together in the congregation that can talk about scientific facts. And then the fact that we all want clean air and clean water, besides wanting it, I agree with it being a human right. And coincidentally, the current chair of the board of Interfaith Power and Light is a Baptist minister from Atlanta who walked with Martin Luther King. He's an extraordinary man called Gerald Durley. And Gerald told me this is the civil rights issue of today. Everybody's entitled to clean air and clean water. And he talks about it as a civil rights issue. He's an extraordinary man. He's a PhD, well-educated, articulate, in his late 70s now, and convinced me that clean air, clean water, the climate, or a healthy climate, are civil rights, issue, and everyone is entitled to those things.
Well, that's great. Yeah, so we're totally on the same page with that. So another quote from your book is from Gus Speth. He's the former dean of the Yale School of Forestry and the Environment. And he says, I used to think the greatest problems threatening the planet were pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change. I was wrong there too. I now believe that the greatest problems are pride, apathy, and greed. And so I wonder, how do pride, apathy, and greed get in the way of our call as Christians and people from other faith traditions to care for the environment?
I don't necessarily remember that quote, but just speaking off the cuff, I bet he's talking about corporations, because I don't think individual people, well, there are some people who are greedy, but I don't necessarily buy into a lack of pride or greediness in individual people. But I think where corporations get involved and their whole job is to make the value of their stocks rise and make money for their shareholders, they get their values all mixed up, and they don't look at the average person when they send out misinformation on climate change, for example. And because if people think that the climate problem is a hoax, then they will continue to buy big gas guzzling cars, and then that helps their energy use and helps them make money. So that, to me, I think Gus must have been saying, I think he must have been talking about corporations. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of people who are greedy and selfish. And I do think, well, I think it's very selfish not to get a COVID shot as well. You're not thinking about your neighbor. And unless there are extraordinary circumstances, if we love our neighbors, I think it's a very Christian thing to do. You want to do what you can to help your neighborhood. And I feel the same way about climate. And I don't know, the greed and pride, I'm certainly not an expert on. I'm not a psychiatrist. You could probably do better than I can, Bernadette, on that one.
No, I don't. No, biology and psychology are related, but only by an interest in the human brain.
And maybe we have someone listening in who might know about the pride and greed.
Exactly. Well, speaking of the psychology of the topic here at hand, I think there's a general recognition of the overwhelming nature of the problem of climate change, biodiversity loss, and it sometimes makes us feel powerless, and then we feel like there's really nothing that we can do. So I was wondering if you could give us some tips on things that everyone can do in their personal life to take action.
Well, we should probably walk wherever we can if we have the time. We need to turn off all electrical devices in our homes that we're not using. And we need to recycle. And a really good thing to do would be to not use plastic. Somebody just said to me, when I felt so stupid that I hadn't thought of it myself, we are buying lettuce now that comes out of a plastic box, and it's called, fresh spring cut. And she said, don't do that. Don't buy those plastic boxes. Get a head of lettuce. And I thought, she's absolutely right. And since I heard that, which was now just a few weeks ago, now I'm getting my own head of lettuce and cutting the bottom off and washing it, and instead of buying in one of those plastic containers. And I think that plastic is a huge issue, particularly with the oceans. Now, I know that's not our subject tonight, but it is an issue. And then, did I mention I have a compost in my backyard? I don't have any waste. I have no wasted food. It all goes into the compost, and it turns into this wonderful, dark, wonderful smelling dirt. And I use it to plant my tomatoes in the summer, and all my flowers get good nutrients in there, in the soil, all coming from food. And I think waste is a huge issue. I'm not going to say don't eat meat, but I would say eat less meat, because raising cattle has causing havoc on our tropical forests and on our land. There are some people who have bacon for breakfast and a hamburger for lunch and a steak for dinner. And that to me is irresponsible. We don't need it. It's not that good for you. And it's encouraging this agricultural industry of harm to animals. So just eat a little less meat.
Yeah.
So there, I mean, it's
like
animals.
the Meatless Monday, for example.
Oh,
They'll
yeah.
institute the Meatless Monday, get used to that idea. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So I guess one of the questions that we wanted to ask you are, what are some of your favorite biblical quotes that speak to taking care of the environment?
Oh, well, the best one, and the one I always use, is in Genesis, where God put Adam in the garden to till it and to keep it. I mean, God said, look, folks, here's the garden, you're the gardeners. And that to me is one of the most powerful ones. And the other one is Jesus said, what you do to the least of us, you do to me. And the way we treat other people and the way the environment affects poor nations in a much harsher way than it does some of us, those are things for us to be conscious of. And when you find that when I've been to those COP conferences, every year, the Conference of Parties, and you have poor nations coming and saying, look, we don't have the money to put renewable energy on our roofs. We don't have the money to build dikes to prevent the sea from rising. You all have to help us. And that's where the religious community comes in, because we say, yes, we do. It's one thing to be building, putting solar and doing all that we can do here in the US, but what about all those poor nations? And if Jesus said, treat those folks fairly, and we consider ourselves good Christians, then we need to help the people who can't afford to make some of those changes themselves. And what else did you ask me?
I think that was that. I think that was it. And
quotes, yeah.
So I did have one last question, but you already answered it. So, I was going to ask you, what is your approach to caring for and advocating for the environment, optimistic or pessimistic? But I think I know the answer to that question. I'm going to guess it's optimistic.
Yeah, very optimistic. Yeah.
So, and me too. I mean, I think that, the idea of community of hope that, it's why I teach. It's why I do the job I do. There is hope for the future. And I do think even with young people, it's funny, the people that I teach, they don't, when I take them out to dinner, for example, they don't order soda. They always order water. They walk around and they carry their water bottles and they just refill their water bottles. And they're very happy to find a water fountain or a tap or whatever. And I had one the other day, he left his water bottle in the forest. He was on a research trip with me and he was almost in a panic. He's like, and he said, I don't have another one. And I was like, ooh, can you borrow one for the weekend? We're going to come back on Monday. He ran back to get it because it's like, that was his. So I think the youth, I have a lot of hope for, the action that they're really making big changes. But thank you so much, Sally, for this tremendous gift of your time and talents that you shared with all of us tonight. We hope that everyone tonight will take away an array of take-home messages and will see the value of rallying their congregations to covenant for all creation, human and non-human, living and non-living. So I now open the door up. Did you have any last minute things you wanted to say, Sally, to the crowd?
I just hope that somebody listening to us has asked a few questions, and
We
maybe
do.
Claire's going to tell us what they are.
That's great.
Yes, so we have a question from, I think it's Al. Today, religious leaders, including the Archbishop of Canterbury, gathered with Pope Francis to supposedly renew their commitments to the environment and the actions needed to address the climate crisis. What kind of outcomes do you think, if any, that we might expect in our diocese as a result of these renewed commitments? So maybe Reverend Sally, you could speak about what you expect in your diocese or in the broader Episcopal Church.
Yeah, I'm in the Diocese of California, so I don't know what will happen in Maryland, although Eugene Sutton is a well-known care for creation person, and he will respond in an appropriate way. Here, Bishop Mark Andrus, who's our bishop in California, is already so committed to climate protection that it probably won't change much of his attitude. But I think the encyclical that the Pope wrote, which is now it's been 5 years, had a very big influence on, coincidentally, not the religious community as much as the secular world. I cannot possibly come up with all the times that I was asked, whether it was Environmental Defense Fund or Union of Current Scientists or just a group of people who wanted me to come and talk about the encyclical, and they weren't religious people. I think that it didn't have the effect on the Catholic Church that they had hoped it would, but they're starting to push it again. And the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew, who was the signer of that document with the Pope and with the Archbishop of Canterbury, he's been working on climate change and the environment now for 40 years. And I'm glad they did that. I mean, those are really powerful religious leaders that come. I think the patriarch is head of 50 million Greek Orthodox that are in Greece and Turkey. And then the Anglican communion is huge when you get into Africa and Asia. And so I can only hope that if it's a short statement, every single congregation will read it out loud to their parishioners. And we did that with the encyclical. We had Bible study around it and group study of it. So I can only say, I hope that it has an effect, and a good one.
When I read the encyclical, I was on a beach vacation, the Laudato Si, and I brought it with me, and I actually cried when I read it, because I was like, it's about time,
Right.
So this isn't necessarily a question per se. It's really more of a story. This is from Margaret, and she says, we just bought an electric car and I spent a lot of time having to defend its use in the conservative town I live in. I'm encouraged by your witness of knocking on windows of cars with running engines. Perhaps I should be happy enough with what I am doing and not try to convert people who don't believe in climate change, COVID-19, or even the Holocaust. Scientific facts are not acknowledged in here by the majority. So maybe the question is, do you have any advice for Margaret in kind of dealing with people who may not believe as you believe?
Well, Margaret, good for you. I'm glad you have an electric car. I know that by 2030 in California, something like 50% of the automobiles have to be electric. We're going in that direction. So you're on the cutting edge of something new. And anybody who makes fun of you or teases you or won't back up about your electric car, just smile, because it's their loss. I mean, I think a lot of people think that they're very expensive as well. And the one I have, which was quite inexpensive because it's from the Mercedes, and it was, I knew it's an $11,000 car, but I lease it and I pay something like $100 a month, and I don't buy any gas anymore. It's very inexpensive to run. And so there are ways to have an electric car, and I'm glad you have one.
So there's another question from Linda that's kind of in a similar vein. What do you say to people who politicize and debunk environmental issues? And it just says and fake, but who debunk environmental issues?
Well, this isn't going to be a very polite answer, but I think they're stupid. Sorry. They're not reading the facts. They're not getting their news from the right place. And, there is one line that I used once when somebody was telling me that the climate change was not an issue and I should pay attention to something that was more real. And I said, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. I hope the climate is not an issue. I hope it's not warming. But if I'm right and it is warming, look at what we've causing to the planet. And if you're right, we've switched to renewable energy, we've saved money, and we've done all these good things anyway. It's a win-win to care about the climate, to care about other people, to care about creation. And I think those of us who are on that, what I'm going to say, right moral path, need to stay there without criticizing other people, but we just need to smile and say, thank you. I hope you're right.
Yes, and we all need to encourage each other. So Dick asks, can you name several other environmental organizations you are affiliated with or follow? Any bubble up for you as doing work on the leading edge of climate literacy or action?
Well, I think the Union of Concerned Scientists is stellar. I mean, they are really, really good. And they're talking now about environmental justice and racism and diversity, which is a subject a lot of organizations have embraced. And Environmental Defense Fund, another amazing organization. And then if you wanted to focus on animals, the Audubon Society does a wonderful job with keeping us informed about the air and the pollution. And so that's three. We have an organization out of the Commonwealth Club here in San Francisco that's called Climate One. And it is conversations, podcasts, and in-person discussions about the climate and diverse opinions. And he even had the head of Shell Oil Company come on one time last year, or maybe before the pandemic. So it would have been 2 years ago. Gets a lot of diverse opinions and people to talk to each other about these issues. So look up Climate One. The podcasts are really good.
Well, thank you for those suggestions. Those are all the questions that I see in the chat. I'll just ask if anyone else has a question, please put something in the chat and we'd be happy to field it. Perhaps while we're waiting for that, Reverend Sally, can you, I apologize if I'm going to ask something that you've already answered, but what personally led you to want to focus on care of creation?
Well, I love that question. I was on the National Board of Environmental Defense Fund when we moved to San Francisco in 1984. And we joined this little church out on California Street, St. James Episcopal Church. And while I was at EDF board meetings, I was listening to, and we have 3 a year, and we get scientific expertise to come in and say, here's what's happening. And in the early 80s, it was overfishing, deforestation, lead and gasoline, antibiotics being fed to poultry and cattle. And I was just sitting in the pew listening to myself love creation and love my neighbor, and listening to, in our baptismal vows, we say we will not let anything destroy creation. And I thought, wow, how can we sit in a pew? If we as religious people are not protecting creation, who is going to? And that was my personal experience. I lay awake at night thinking, hey, these people need to know what humans are doing to the planet. And I was getting that information from EDF at board meetings. And I thought, if I know this, then I got to share it with everybody else. But how do I get up into a pulpit and start sharing it until I go to college, go to seminary, do 3 years in a church as a volunteer, and then get ordained, and then I can get in the pew and tell everybody what I know that humans are doing to the planet. So that's how I got started.
Awesome. And we're so glad you did. You've really inspired us this evening. Nina asks, how do you keep up your spirits when you get dispirited, or are you always hopeful?
Well, I'm not a Pollyanna, but I'm probably close to it. And that's because my son and daughter-in-law have given me 2 adorable little grandsons. And the 3-year-old had his birthday party here last Friday, and they came to church this Sunday. I baptized them a couple of years ago, and they came for the first time ever to Grace Cathedral yesterday and took communion. And that little 5-year-old looked up at me and he said, well, why did you give me this little white round thing? I mean, there's something about these 2 little boys that are just, it's so wonderful that I'm sure I'm going to get down at a different time. I hurt myself last year where I had a pinched nerve and I couldn't ride my horse and I couldn't play tennis because there was pain in my right leg. And I thought, oh no, I'm never going to be healthy again. But over time, I got healthy and recovered. And basically, I think was born with a happy heart.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think we all can get something out of that wonderful story. So I see it's almost time. I don't see any other questions in the chat. I would just like to acknowledge the work of a few people who actually were behind the scenes putting this together. So you see Bernadette Roche and myself, but I also want to recognize Dick Williams, Linda Boyd, and Nina Beth Carden for their work in putting this program together, and obviously Reverend Sally Bingham for spending this hour with us and sharing her advice and wisdom and encouragement about engaging on caring for creation. Bernadette, do you have anything else?
Thanks. I did want to put in the chat, I'm going to put the GreenGrace email in case anybody here is not in touch with us. So you can email us and we will put you on our mailing list, let you know about other events that are coming about. So we are GreenGrace, type it out here, at Episcopal Maryland. I don't make any typos.org. Episcopal, I got it right. All right, no typos. So you could email us there, let us know who you are. We probably have some information about you in the chat, and so great to be here with everybody. Thank you.
Yes, and if anybody would like to be in touch, I will, with me, I am going to put my email in the chat.
And thanks, Sally. This was fun. It was great to talk with you again. And
Thanks.
Yes, so I hope you have a wonderful evening tonight. It's what, 5 o'clock for you, so start of your evening.
It's 5 o'clock and my dog is out in the garden making the neighbors crazy.
Yes.
I have to go stop her from barking.
Okay.
This was really fun. Bernadette, thank you for having me. Claire, it was nice meeting you. And
Yes,
thank
nice meeting you
everybody
too.
who
Thank you
was
everyone for
listening in.
joining.
Take care.
Take
Good night,
care.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.